The Van Winkles came from the Netherlands, and Van Winkle means from Winkle, and in the old days it was spelt K-E-L, not K-L-E, and there is an area in the Netherlands called Winkle. It used to be a town. They have combined a number of the smaller communities into larger communities over there, so it kind of lost its identity. It's roughly a mile and a half southwest of the Zuider Zee, and I think 15 miles northwest of the harbor of Hoorn. And actually Hoorn is where my forefathers left to come to the New World, and Jacob Wallink. And Wallink was spelt a number of different ways, and I won't go into that, all the different spellings. I will say that we did, my cousins, Margaret and Nancy Van Winkle, produced this pamphlet or booklet in 1987. Margaret had quite a bit of publishing experience, and Nancy was very close with her and was a good editor for her. And they did a marvelous job, and this was for the 300th anniversary of when we purchased land in what is now the town of Rutherford. And so we had a little get-together. I guess we had about 100 people attend, and had various events going on in 1987. Luckily, my son made the cut as far as the photos are concerned, and so he's the youngest person in the photo, although not the youngest person in the genealogy line, because his first cousin Sterling, or second cousin Sterling, would be my first cousin David's oldest son, was born shortly after he was, but there was no photo that was able to make it. We were only able to put his name in the genealogy. And of course Sterling was named for my grandfather Sterling. And so that's how I got my middle name and how he got his first name. He, of course, came over fairly early on to the colony of New Amsterdam, in I believe the 1633, and he later went back over to the old country to find a bride and bring her over, and they settled primarily in Aquanock, which is now called Passaic. And there was quite a settlement there. Subsequent to that, and prior to 87, or right at 87, he purchased the western track of Captain John Barry's land, where Berry Creek gets its name. And Captain John Barry was an Englishman, and by then England had pretty much taken over New Amsterdam and renamed it New York. Interesting book, I don't know whether anyone's read it, is The Island in the Center of the World, and it's something that should be mandatory reading for the early colonizations and the going-ons. It's an entertaining book. Well, they expanded a old hunting shack of Captain John Barry's, and it was on the corner of what is Darwin and Hastings Avenue. There's a slight rise in the floodplain there, so I guess the structure didn't get flooded with the spring floods, because that's really why they purchased the land. Was agrarian society of the 1600s. Looked for the spring floods to bring the new topsoil for your crops. This was before we knew about crop rotation or sacrificial crops or amending the soils with other product. And so you always waited for the spring floods to bring your new topsoil from upstream, and that way you could grow your vegetables. And I think that's one of the reasons why Wallink decided to buy this tract of land. He could see that New York was going to be a thriving colony, and that they're going to need produce, and he was going to produce it for them. And of course, having the thoroughfare of the Passaic River as your main access point gave him an opportunity to sell his product to a variety of areas and settlements, including New York. I think a lot of people have seen general stores in rural areas, and this certainly was a rural area. And they basically, if you needed a pair of boots or nails or whatever, flour or grains or anything, that's what we sold. And we also sold and brokered real estate, and then I guess later on insurance. And what's interesting, a lot of people don't realize, you had in insurance, you always had fire companies, and then you also had casualty companies. They were separate. And it wasn't until perhaps 40 years ago that they actually combined them. So now you have what, your homeowner's policy of today is actually a combo policy where you have liability aspects and you also have property coverage. Yes, and it's the same building. It may look different. There was a number of facade changes over the years, and we have them documented in photos. Certainly the one that we use a lot with our imagery is the 1872 photo, which we have a number of shots there, and shows the open porch and what is our lower level of our office space now. When I first started coming to the office, or the office that I remember, that lower level was a separate section, and was actually the inner city bus terminal. And a lot of people that were longtime residents of Rutherford will remember the brown and tan line of the inner city, and essentially was the same route that the 190, New Jersey 190 takes. And when inner city went out, it was then picked up and it was public service for a while, and then it was later New Jersey Transit. It morphed into that. There certainly were some planned developments, and certainly some of the Van Winkle family was involved in planned development. A lot of people remember my cousin Arthur and Van Winkle and Liggett, and he and Walter Liggett separated from A.W. Van Winkle and Company and actually opened up down the block from us in somewhat competition. But he developed property that is over in the would be the southeast corner of the uplands, because the southeast corner, the 220 block is really the southeast corner, which is out in the meadows. But of the uplands, right in between 17 and Route 3, or what is currently 17 and Route 3. And so they built all the homes that were in Arthur Drive and Walter Court, and thus the name. And the Van Winkles had a lot of, we're certainly recognized in Rutherford, but I would say that we extend well past those boundaries. We have virtually as much history in East Rutherford, and certainly Wallington. Wallington got its name from my forefather as Wallingstown, and that's the name is, is noted as that. But we also were involved in developments in Wayne, off of Alps Road. So we've been around and done a lot of real estate in the general area, and certainly I'm very happy with a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in. The apartment building that's the Avalon over in East Rutherford was one of my major coups to get that built, and I'm very happy with it. Well, that was Daniel that donated it, and I wish I could say it was totally altruistic, but he did own the property on either side, so he did have some self-interest in the in donating the land, and supposedly it's supposed to go back to the heirs of Daniel Van Winkle if they ever stop using it as a train station. And I know my father got visited by a representative of Conrail, who owned the tracks at the time, and he wanted my father to get everybody to sign off on the deed so they would remove this restriction. And my father said, "You've got to be crazy. I mean, how much are you going to pay me to go chase everybody down?" Because we have relatives that stem from Daniel that are living in the state of Washington, and and to track everybody down would be a near impossibility. And we tried to track them down as best we could in 1987 for the reunion, and we got a number of them here, but still it was a daunting task.
The railroad changed Rutherford. Talk about that a bit.
Well, I think railroads in general, whether you're talking about the East or the West, certainly changed. You probably saw more dramatically in the West, where there were less railroads and far more wide open spaces in between them. It would make or break a community whether you had a railroad, and certainly it helped Rutherford in its early development. Having the train station here. Of course, we had a number of train stations, if you recall, because we also had the Carlton Hill station, which was where Jackson crosses over into East Rutherford. That was Carlton Hill section of East Rutherford. And of course, Rutherford prior to 1881 was a portion of Union Township. And so we had Union Township here, and then just to the north of us in Hasbrook Heights area in Lodi, we had Lodi Township and Garfield. And so they were far larger areas. Somebody, a developer, I had heard that it was perhaps a few attorneys in New York had a friendly year in Trenton, and they got legislation passed through Trenton to able to incorporate areas of these townships and where they could develop them. And that's what happened here in Rutherford. Rutherford was the first to break away from Union Township. And if you look at the anniversaries of our area towns around us, they've celebrated their little anniversaries of incorporation a year or two or three or four after us, and but 1881 was our date. Daniel lived everywhere. He lived upstairs here. He lived in an octagon house in Garfield. He lived on Meadow Road. He lived in the house behind me where I live at 56 Sylvan. He wandered everywhere, and he seemed to be a kind of a restless soul, he lived everywhere. So I wouldn't say, I mean, that was a portion, I think when he owned the Kip farm, when he bought the Kip farm, that's where he was. and subsequent to that. And I do have a wonderful painting that was done by a painter by the name of Sedgwick of that home, and I have that hanging in my house. I don't have it here. We used to hang here, but I said this is too good a painting to have here. We'll hang it in the house.
I guess people would be surprised when you know, if you look back in the history of Rutherford, and you find out that like Meadow Road at one time, that was the main street. Meadow Road was all in town.
It certainly was. I mean, well, when you think about north-south, it made a lot of sense. I mean, it was flat for long expanses along the edges of the meadows, and so that probably made for the better thoroughfare, you know, going north-south. And the Plank Road, of course, went east-west, Patterson Plank Road. And so those were probably the two main thoroughfares in the community. It's interesting that when they laid out Rutherford in the early days with the incorporation, that they looked to Orient Way as being the main street. And if you look on your maps, there's a 100-foot right-of-way with Orient Way, where Park Avenue is 60-foot right-of-way, as it is with most of the local streets. Now, some streets are narrower, but for the most part, most of the streets in Rutherford are 60-foot right-of-ways, and that includes the sidewalks on either side. But what happened was the merchants located on Park Avenue, primarily because of the Valley Brook Racecourse. And when the train brought the rich New Yorkers in from the city to recreate, they got on their horse and carriages, and there's certainly a number of buildings that still stand today that were liveries that would take people all over, but primarily down to the Valley Brook racetrack to watch the horse racing. And of course that's in Lyndhurst, right at the end of Park Avenue and River Road, where those two merge. And so that's why the merchants located on Park Avenue was, here's the rich tourists. I mean, they had a captive audience with everybody else. They could have put their building anywhere if the locals were buying. Well, Arthur Ward was the oldest of Daniel's sons, and he had a number of sons and daughters. Then the A.W. took over the real estate and then the insurance portion of the business, and the general store kind of faded off to you know, the archives or whatever, and they broke down to specialty stores elsewhere, you know, as competition came in. And so that was the concentration. And there were also other businesses that opened up in this building. And we talked about this a little bit before. This building always has been kind of an incubator for business. There's a number of businesses that have started here and expanded and gone off and done very well. And a lot of it has to do with the location, being crossroads of bus routes and the train. An ideal location. Wallink's sons, Jacob Wallink, actually brokered property in 1692, and so we look at that sale, that brokerage. He was apparently well educated for the area, and if you notice, a number of the deeds on the wall here stem from prior to the Declaration of Independence, and a number of people just signed by making their mark and using a wax seal. Everybody seemed to have a ring, and you kind of melted wax on there and put your embossment of your ring on there to give you your mark. And I think what happened was he kind of fell into the business because he was perhaps better educated, could write well, and could organize thoughts, and as such he could write deeds and help with the transfer of property, and in the process negotiate what that property was. And so that's kind of how the family fell into the business. Well, I mean, it's very much Ozzie and Harriet, as you can well imagine. It was a very nice community. As a small child, I could almost walk anywhere and be relatively safe. Certainly, there were a lot of people that knew me, just from shopping with my parents. I often talk about being able to cross Park Avenue at a fairly young age to go shopping for my mother at a small market that was Shock's Market, which is where I think Bagel Supreme is now, in that strip of stores. And to talk about something else, I mean, my mother was a smoker, and even as a small child, she used to send me over to the neighborhood pharmacy to buy a carton of cigarettes for her. Now, of course, that wouldn't happen today. But she liked sending me because she got her change back. If she sent my sister, she didn't get her change back.
Talk about some of the stores that were on Park Avenue. I mean, these were names were iconic then and disappeared.
Incredible. I mean, Drucker's department store was a department store, a small department store. I mean, the real department stores, of course, were in Newark and in the city, but Drucker's had just about anything you could possibly need, and it was a wonderful spot. As a small child, I mean, every woman behind the counter knew my name and knew who my mother was, and I was not unique in that. I mean, it was every child that came in there. So when mom needed a birthday present or something, she knew exactly what I was able to, the person behind the counter knew exactly what I was able to afford, and had just the right thing for me, and would wrap it. And of course I knew Walter and Arthur Drucker very, very well through my father, who was very active in the Rutherford Chamber of Commerce. And both Walter and Arthur were very active in the Chamber of Commerce. Oh yeah, very much so. In fact, there's a funny story about that. Of course, Seymour Mahler, who was this stepbrother of Bob and Ralph and Richie Zimmerman, was good friends of mine when we were in the Chamber of Commerce. Seymour, I had a good time with Seymour, and Richie ended up being a salesman here at A.W. Van Winkle and Company after the store got wrapped up, and he was a very good salesman. But a lot of things people don't know about. Richie was colorblind, and of course my father used to taunt him unmercifully because he loved Richie, but he just absolutely would go in there and ask him which color tie he should pick with this particular, which went with this suit, and he knew Richie was colorblind.
Now, at the start of the school year, were you ever marched in there to get your school clothes for the year to come?
Maybe not there. Certainly Suburban Shop, Berlin's, another store. Zimmerman's might have been a little, better dressed than I was. I was pretty tough on my clothes. I was, I'd go through the knees pretty quickly. Probably just coming home from school. So, and my situation is different than a lot of my family members. My sister went all the way through Rutherford school system. I left the Rutherford school system in 5th grade at Pierpont School and went to Passaic Collegiate, and then graduated from high school at Admiral Farragut Academy. So I kind of lost contact with Rutherford and a lot of the Rutherford kids just simply because I wasn't going to the same schools.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's too bad, but that's the way it was. My father served as a councilman and also as mayor. And there's a number of other members. Ted was the magistrate in Rutherford for many, many years. And they certainly were active and involved with various community functions. My folks were co-chairmans of the Bicentennial Committee, and that was in '76. And an offshoot from, a lot of people don't realize this, an offshoot from that committee was, they had a subcommittee that set up the Labor Day Street Fair. And so we've been having the Labor Day Street Fair since '76, and primarily because of that committee. And it was started initially. It started down in the Memorial Field, and then they later moved it up to Park Avenue, closing the street. And of course, it's probably one of the most successful street fairs in New Jersey to date. We got 40,000 or so people here. And a lot of it has to do with the consistency. It was designed to be a mostly antique and collectible type thing, not junky flea market. And so it attracted a lot of people. And it's grown every year, pretty much. And had very good weather for the most part. Well, yeah, you know, at least through the stories that I've heard. You know, obviously, stories get colored over the years, and it's sometimes difficult to separate fact from fiction. But yeah, for the most part, you know, that comes from not moving. You know, we still have a lot of our stuff because we haven't moved. You know, when you move, you have to decide what you want to keep and what you want to throw out. And a lot of people have lost a good number of their family history because they've had to decide to throw it out. And luckily, we haven't had to make that decision for the most part.